Good morning, Welma. Welcome to the cave. How are you?
Good morning, Almin. I'm doing very well, thank you. And thanks so much for having me on this lovely autumn day. I think we're moving into the colder weather
Yes,
as we go along.
absolutely. We are very grateful to have you here at the cave. Under the component of bonfire, we seek to have conversations with experts and professionals in a variety of fields about topics that can empower designated social workers, or casually known as child protection social workers in South Africa, to make better decisions in practice, because child protection social workers in South Africa don't have time or the luxury or the money always to, have meetings with people from a variety of fields, multidiscipline, meetings, consultations. So that's what we try and do here. And yeah, I'm very excited to hear what you have to say today. And you're from a completely different profession, but I'm going to allow you to talk to that. And then when you're done, just introducing yourself to the designated social workers that might be watching this video pretty soon, we are going to talk about signs of physical neglect in babies, because babies is your area of expertise. So excited to hear what you have to say so that designated social workers can really listen and apply that when they work with babies in practice. But let me keep quiet. Please introduce yourself. Just let them know who you are, what's your background, your qualifications, and where you are today.
Thanks, Almin. So I'm a professor in nursing and midwifery at the School of Nursing Science research entity, which is called NuMIQ. It's research or quality in nursing and midwifery research. And that's at the Northwest University, and I'm living in Potchefstroom, lovely town where I'm in. So I've done my PhD on midwifery, and it was very interesting because I work in the field actually of premature babies. And there we looked at best practice guidelines for premature babies and how we care for them and so on. Yes, and then that brings us to the field of midwifery, where babies, of course, is the thing we do. So we work with babies when they are born, and we work with them within that first few weeks after birth. And then some of my colleagues will take over when they work more in the community setting. So then they will go to the bigger children in schools and children in daycare centers. But I focus on the newborn baby and the mum and the new baby and the dads when there is a dad involved.
Oh, awesome. Okay, that's fantastic. And you are also a published author. You've done research in this field. So you are truly an expert when it comes to this topic. So
Thank you.
we are very happy to have you. Thank you so much. So designated social workers work with child abuse, and often, and unfortunately, that means babies too. And I think designated social workers are aware of, several signs when a baby has been abused or neglected. But perhaps you can just tell us today, from your position of expertise, what are the signs? If you can give us five top signs that a baby has been physically neglected, what would that be?
I think it's easier to look at the child who's physically abused than the baby that's physically abused. Because with a child, you have some developmental milestones which you can go according to, but with a baby, that can be delayed and the delay can be normal. So that makes it a little bit more challenging. But I think one of the big things that we often see is the shaken baby syndrome. So that's the baby that might have head trauma, or just have convulsions and things like that. And then if you go back and you get some history, then you realize, oh, this mom is so much struggling. Baby's crying all the time. They never stop. And then with history, you get to the point where you realize, oh, this baby has been shaken. And then we can do MRIs and X-rays and so on, and we can see the actual brain damage that happened in these babies. So that's one of the things that happen. I think the other one, and I think for a baby, physical and emotional abuse is very much interlinked. Because the other one that we see is the baby that's left crying. So there's this thing of we do baby sleep training because we need to teach babies to sleep through the night. But that's not the physiological way that babies is made. Babies are made to be carried by mum at least another 6 months after birth, because actually all human babies are born premature because they're not independent when they are born. They're dependent on the mother. So we want them close to the mother. We want them to be cared for and warm and so forth. But often we find that that's not the case. We leave the baby in a room and they need to cry it out because they need to learn to sleep. But the only thing that they learn is that they are rejected. So they stop crying. So there's lots of research done on orphanages, for example, after the war, where they saw that these babies just tune out. After a while, this wonderful, quiet babies. They never cry. But they never cry because they learned that crying does not bring an adult to look after their basic needs. So that's why they stop crying. So I think a baby that's never crying is definitely a sign. A baby that have convulsions, and then any blue bruises that you see on the baby's body, and especially if they're very tiny, like our premature babies, their bones are not strong enough. So if you pick up a baby very rough, or it doesn't need to be very rough, it can just be a little bit hard, then you can actually break the arms, just because of that bone density that's not so thick like we want it to be. Unfortunately, I often saw that in neonatal ICU, but that was with premature babies. We pick them up gently, and then even you can break their arms. Sure. So it's not always that we neglect the babies, it's just because they're so small and so fragile and so interlinked, and the parents are so emotionally exhausted from this whole experience.
And maybe uninformed. There might be parents out there with premature babies and they're not aware of this information. So social workers listening to this should definitely take this information and share that as a way of...
And we always think that a child needs to be bigger to be a problem child, to be diagnosed with autism or anything on the spectrum or sensory problems or so on. But we know now from that field that we actually see these things in babies. We see this is a baby that's very difficult to fall asleep. Now, sometimes that can be in the normal range, but often it's a predictor of this child will struggle later on. And if the parents don't have the support system, then this can go into this physical abuse situation. And then the normal things that we see in children, the bruises, like I said, burned by cigarette butts, those kind of things. And yeah, we see that. Unfortunately, in our low economic settings, and that's not really abuse, I think that's more environmental and systemic problem, is we see that babies sleep on the floor because that's the only place that they have to sleep. And then at nighttime, the rats come and they bite and they eat the fingers and the toes, just because the baby can't do anything about that. So from a social work perspective, how do we make sure that the environment is good? So the Finnish people have a baby bed, a baby box. So it's like a carton box, a nice thick carton, and they put the babies in there. And then you can actually let them sleep on the floor because it's nice and isolated. It keeps them warm, it keeps them safe, prevents them from suffocation. So that's a small thing that we can actually get implemented as a large project in the country.
Welma, I am a designated social worker myself, although I'm also in academia like you now. And I've seen some things in my professional career, but never have I heard of rats eating away at babies who sleep on the floor because there simply is no other option. That is just, I just need a second to process that. I mean, that is truly horrific.
Yes, and unfortunately it happens. No, and it happens all around us. So, yeah.
Wow. Okay, and so obviously
doesn't have a good environment.
So obviously these parents don't know about the risk when they place the baby on the floor, but then after a while, if the baby's fingers start disappearing, they, I presume, come to the hospital where people like you will be to serve. Yes. Are they then educated? Do they, or
yes,
are they shocked? Are they shocked when you reveal to them that it's as simple as do not leave your baby on the floor?
Yeah, but usually they're in the situation that they don't know.
Yeah.
What else can I do? So
yes.
They need to be educated antenatally before birth already.
Okay, well,
so the education there is more like one of the big things that we do, which is wonderful for both physical and emotional bonding for the baby and care, is skin-to-skin care.
Yeah.
So when the babies are born, we try and put them in skin-to-skin care immediately. So the baby's in the nappy, mummy's undressed, put the baby between the breast,
yes.
and that's both nice and warm. So they keep warm, they get fed, and they get all that hormones that mum and baby have. So that's a natural, instant normal thing that can happen just by putting the baby in the right place.
Yes.
So you don't need a medical degree to be at birth and help with that. So you can become a doula who's just in the labor ward and can do that education there and get involved in that process.
Amazing.
You can also be in antenatal before birth as well as postnatal. So without your profession, you can get involved if that's the area you're interested in.
No, look, I think that's pivotal. That's really important information you're sharing, and perhaps some of the other colleagues in the field know about these babies being eaten by rats. I've really in my professional career, I've never seen it. I've seen horrible things, but I've not seen that. No. So to all the designated social workers watching this interview now, and to hear what's being said by Welma, perhaps an awareness campaign, as a form of early intervention in your communities, especially of the poorer communities, just to prevent that from happening, because, as you know, every child has constitutional rights, and one of those include being protected from any physical harm. So, and being eaten by a rat because your mom put you on the ground is, unacceptable. But we understand that there's a lack of knowledge sometimes on certain aspects of parenting, and that's the job of social workers. One of our many jobs is to educate, so as to prevent things from going wrong. I just want to go back to the shaken baby syndrome.
Yes.
In your work with these cases, and the research you've read, etc., what contributes to mothers, or I suppose sometimes fathers, shaking babies? Could you speak to that? Have you discovered any answers as to why? Is it frustration? Is it pure evil abuse intentions? What is it?
Not at all.
Oh.
Actually, it just happens because you're too tired.
Wow.
Remember, when you have a newborn baby, that baby wants to feed at least every 3 hours. Now, when they're new, they take an hour to feed. So from they wake up, if they're a very good baby and sleeping well and so forth. So from they wake up, you need to change the nappy, put them on the breast, feed them, wind them, put them back on, wind them again, play a little bit with them, put them back to bed, and hopefully they fall asleep straight away, which never happens. We take you around an hour. Then you have, if it's a very good baby, 2 hours in between where you can rest. And usually there's a home to attend to, you may be back to work, or you just want to sleep a little bit. And then that happens every 3 hours. Oof. Now we need 8 hours of uninterrupted sleep.
Yes.
Now, if after a week you don't have one night of 8 hours of uninterrupted sleep, you are just mentally not there.
Yeah.
So if that is difficult at night, say for example, the baby have a bit of colic, or it's just a little bit crampy, or just don't want to fall asleep because they're lonely or they want to be warm or whatever, then you get so frustrated. It's just a question of, can you just not stop crying and go to? That's all. That's all it needs.
It's not this wild shaking. It's just
not necessarily.
It could, in some cases it is, but in some cases it's just a frustrated, beyond exhausted mother who says, please keep quiet.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And then other things that happen is, for example, you put your baby on the bed and there's another sibling and they just come along and they push a little bit on the new baby because it's like a doll or a cat or the dog, and your baby falls from the bed, which is about 1 meter high. So then you have this baby with a brain injury because they fell from the bed. So that's also not abuse. That's just
life.
And I think parents and social workers also need to have that differentiation. And things happen.
I was just going to say, so when designated social workers investigate cases of alleged abuse or neglect, one has to be very cautious in the investigation process to collect all the facts in a very objective way to come to the most truthful conclusion of what happened, what transpired, or led to the child's brain injury. Yes, the child maybe fell from the bed, but that wasn't because the mother pushed, circumstances, etc. Okay, so, but the consequence...
Sorry for interrupting you. I think what's important there, especially for the social worker, is to go back and say, okay, so how can you support the mother to have a good support structure? Because
Yes.
remember, 30 years ago, we had babies in a community where the mum and the aunt and everybody was there, and somebody could come in and quickly look after the baby while you just have a nap or go to have a bath.
Yes.
Now we sit in cities or on the countryside, but we don't have support.
Yes.
So it's me, mum, the baby, and dad is probably working somewhere else.
Yeah.
So for 24 hours, this little person that screams, it's my responsibility. So I can love that baby however much I want, but at some stage you just feel that this is too much. Emotionally, it's too much for me alone.
Well, we all have our limits, right? So that's
Absolutely.
totally understandable. And I think in the new day we live is women work, and so mothers work. And so this is an interesting topic that one should look into a bit deeper, I think, in terms of research and also prevention efforts. Yeah, very interesting. The consequences of shaking the baby physiologically, could you speak 1 to 2 seconds on that? Just
that will
summarize.
probably a baby that's becoming lethargic, it's not reacting anymore, it's very limp. The baby may get convulsions if that is the degree to which the baby has been shaken and the brain injury is. So it's usually, it will be similar to a child that fell from a tree or something.
So those are the indicators that he or she has shaken, but the consequences would be brain injury. Is that the worst case scenario? Maybe a lesser consequence would be...
Lesser will be that the brain injury is passing, like when you when you play around. Yes, so it's not permanent, it goes away, but if it repeats, then it can cause brain damage.
Okay, so the bottom line is that these convulsions, babies who seem very tired, could be an indicator that a child may have been shaken. Shaking a child doesn't mean it was abuse or neglect, or it could mean that, and the consequences can be very severe, a permanent brain injury, or temporary brain injury.
But just to make it a little bit more complex, I mean, those same symptoms you can see with a baby that's not getting enough food, just because he's not drinking well enough, not because mama's not feeding well enough, so the sugar levels fall. And you can also see that with a baby that's too cold. And that's why we say do skin-to-skin care, because skin-to-skin care helps the baby to calm, so they don't cry and you want to shake them. They are warm enough, so the temperature doesn't fall, and the sugar levels remain high, and they can feed as often as they want to. So skin-to-skin care is really a great intervention that we can help moms, and they can do their work and they can move around and so on. So I think it's something practical that we can do in the field.
That's stunning advice. And I really hope the social workers take this information, package it in a way that's, understood by the whatever community where they work, and to make, quite a big change just by a small tweak like that. The other thing you spoke about was the fact that mothers think it's best practice to teach the baby to cope on his or her own when sleeping and ignoring. And now we know we can talk about attachment and the attachment theory and everything. There's so much to say about that. But I want to ask you, have you explored or read what or who made these mothers believe that that is a good practice?
The modern society.
Really?
Because we think that children should be independent from the day of birth.
Wow.
And that's just a belief we have, because children are on their own and adults are on their own. And actually, that's not the way we made. We made that children should be carried and cared for and in a community and close to you 24 hours a day, at least till they're 1 year old. And the research shows that if we carry babies until they're 1 year old, with the exception that they need time to play and explore and so forth, but that carrying and being safe and secure helps them that when they go to school, they don't struggle with this attachment anxiety.
Wow,
then they're much more independent. So it's building that brain connections when they're very tiny to use it when they're a little bit older.
And is this a common belief you find among society, that people honestly from all socioeconomic levels, all racial groups in South Africa, they believe that, most of them believe that? Is that really the case? That is so disturbing.
It's actually more seen in the upper class. So your
Really?
higher socioeconomic environment.
Wow.
That's also where you have babies in prams and babies that's been bottle fed and a nanny that care for the baby. And I'm generalizing now, it's not always, but it's more often seen. So I've had practices where I practiced in high socioeconomic as well as lower or middle socioeconomic. It was interesting in the postnatal classes in the high socioeconomic, the mums come in with a pram and they park the baby and they look at them.
Oh.
And it's noisy and the babies cry and they're difficult and you can't really have a conversation. Where in the lower economic, they come in with the baby in the car seat, they put down the car seat on the floor and they take the baby out and put them on a blanket on the floor and mum sits next to the baby. And those babies don't make a peep. They have eye contact with that mums the whole time. And you can do a whole lecture and that baby's is calm and mums interact. And
they feel secure. There's a secure attachment. So yes. That is interesting. So that is fascinating information. Being a researcher, I find that very interesting when I go do research on it. Okay, so there's this modern day belief conviction that
yes.
it is the right thing to do to create more distance between you as a mom and your baby, to from an early day create a nice independent little Homo sapien, and that is in the baby's best interest. In the meanwhile, causing so much damage in terms of the child's blueprint of relationships, etc., and the child's basic needs of being nurtured. And like you say, the baby is still completely dependent. And to have this expectation of independence is almost bizarre, but bizarre or not, there are some who believe this to be healthy and they are practicing. You are seeing it as an expert in this field, you are seeing it.
Yeah, so well, it's a whole field. There's practitioners that do baby sleep training, and that's their job. They get their salary from that.
From teaching the mothers to separate.
Yes.
Really?
Yes. Really, there's programs. You can have a look. You can Google it. Luckily, there's people that really understand this process and moving towards sleep training, but understanding the baby, being with the baby, reading the cues, and not neglecting the baby and let them cry it out. So it's very important if you want to sleep train your baby that you know what is the foundation that this program is built on. But the bottom line is the baby need to be with a mum.
Yes.
That's the important thing.
And we need to respond to the baby. Ignoring the baby is, So I could speak with you for hours now. You've just
like it now.
mentioned so many topics. I'm going to invite you back to the cave again and hope you say yes. But that is fascinating. Okay. So yeah, the literature, have you read literature or done your own research on the specific consequences physiologically, emotionally in these babies in the long run, who have been separated so much from their mothers during the initial years of caretaking?
Yes, I haven't done that myself, but there's a lot of literature out on that. And the easy way to go about is to look at children that's been orphaned after a war, for example, or that grow up in orphanages, opposed to children where we had family-centered care, where the family is really responsive to how the baby reacts.
Yes.
And then you can see a total difference in the long run. Like I said, the attachment that's better and the independence that's better when the child is ready for that independence a little bit later in their life. Scholastically, they do better. So there's a lot on that. It's really, we know mum and baby need to be together at birth and for that first year at least.
So I just asked that to just... Yes.
Our maternity in South Africa is not supporting parents to link and to connect with their babies. In other countries such as Switzerland or Sweden, I can't remember, I think it's Sweden, they have a year of maternity leave because that's the time that you need to spend with your baby, and it's paid maternity leave.
Wow. So the maternity leave policies or legislation in this country is not supportive of healthy caretaking of children, essentially.
No, it's rather supportive of child abuse, if I can put it.
Yeah, I hear you. Because
where's the child? Mom needs to go to work. So she leaves the child at home. Hopefully there's a granny or an aunt or somebody that can look. Or there's another sibling that's 2 or 3 years old, because they can also not put the child in daycare. So immediately there, the system is creating that abuse already. Yeah.
Have you, sorry, I'm losing track, but this is so interesting. Are you guys doing something to alert the people in power?
Groups these groups that work on this specifically, who are activists in this area.
Okay.
Nothing much is changing.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. Well,
I think we need to tackle it from a more multidisciplinary perspective.
That would be, yes, I think we need to talk.
Absolutely.
But I think what's awesome about this conversation is I hope that the designated social workers hear this, and because oftentimes if people don't understand why something is wrong or bad, they don't have the same conviction and the same drive to correct something. So I think when designated social workers, and I think many of them possibly are more informed than I am, but maybe there are some of them out there like me who, you know, didn't know all these things. And so now when they do intervention programs or awareness work, that they will really carry over this message of how severely important it is to not ignore your child when he or she cries. Sure, that is absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
Welma,
yes? That we didn't talk about, and I don't think we have time today, but which one can consider in future is what happens at birth. And there's a lot of neglect of mothers and then as a result their babies as well during the birth process.
Yeah.
So that system is horrific, sadly to say. Yeah. And then the other one is if we talk about baby safes. I don't know if you know the concept.
Yes.
Babies that can be placed, the mom don't have them. So in some areas that's there. I think that's great to prevent child abuse.
Yes.
But in some areas that's not supported, and it's not supported by government. So those are also things that one can have a look at when we talk about this topic.
No, we're definitely going to line up a few more bonfire conversations with you, Welma. But before we end the conversation, is there anything else, if you can envision 20 designated social workers in front of you and they are ready to leave their home, go into the field, some of them work in poorer communities, others in wealthier communities, and you know, what would you like them to remember about signs of baby abuse and the consequences of baby abuse? Is there any one or two things that you just want to highlight for them before we conclude this conversation?
I think what's important is rather to know good interaction between a mother and a baby. The signs of good attachment, good communication, and so on, so that you immediately can identify when any of those are not there.
Yes.
And I think that's the important thing, so that we don't find certain neglect areas and then we may miss a lot, but that we rather understand what's the ideal world, what would we like to have in order to identify what's not there.
I like your approach much better than I do mine, and I'm immediately going to change it that way. I think that's excellent. Rather have a good picture of what it should look like. And actually, that is what we do. You know, in child abuse investigations, we have the definitions of care, the constitutional rights of children, etc. And we go with that picture to judge what's happening in a family. But yeah, fascinating information about this physical and emotional separation between you and the baby, shaking the baby, and then the obvious signs. Anything about nourishment that you want to quickly mention? Food that could be, you know, something related to the abuse of babies?
I think what's important is to make sure that you have somebody to support you with the feeding of your baby, preferably breastfeeding. So there's lactation consultants available, not always in all the sectors, and that include private and public, but find somebody that knows about baby feeding and that can help you day 1, 2, and 3 after birth, not only 2 weeks later, because a baby can dehydrate and die within 24 to 48 hours if they don't get the right nutrition. So you need to know what is good nutrition, where to find help, and the mums need to have the signs of the baby is well nourished. So 6 to 8 week nappies a day, and then not a dry skin. So that would be the bottom line that we can look at.
Very, very, very useful information, and I'm sure social workers are making notes, but we will have follow-up conversations. Our time has run out, unfortunately, but thank you very much for the, the pools of wisdom that you've shared today from your own experience and your knowledge gained from research and engaging with literature. We really appreciate it. Here at the Cave, it's all about designated social workers. Because they are ultimately the foot soldiers and the frontline workers who make sure a child is protected. Do you have a word of encouragement for them before we end this conversation?
Sure. I think you are way too few people in the field to address everything that needs to be addressed. But you make a huge difference. And I think every child and every child's life is important, but not just living, also the quality of living. And I think that's where the designated social worker come in, to ensure that our children, which will be our future, have a quality life and can develop optimally in whichever environment they live in.
Absolutely. Welma, thank you so much, but this is not the last conversation. I hope you have a good day.
Thank you. I enjoyed it very much. Thanks for inviting me, and may you all do very good work out there. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.